convoluted history of American political parties, from the very first American political party to the day Democrats became Republicans and Republicans became Democrats. That's what I'm talking about. So stay tuned and learn something. Or go away and have a beer. Your choice, my friend. But this video is going to be educational. Maybe, kind of, sort of. And that's because truth is kind of a boring subject. But I also think understanding the history of political parties might be of use today, given the political divide. That and there's a lot of people out there that just don't know shit about history. So settle in, my friends, and yawn all you want, but in the end, well, you might die of boredom, but you'll die a bit smarter. So let's get rolling. First off, know this. Old George Washington belonged to no political party, and he wasn't necessarily a fan of political parties, thinking they actually weakened how government works. And I'm kind of believing he had a point, but that point is for another video down the road. That said, let's get this show on the road. The very first political party was a Federalist Party, and they rose up out of what was a pro-Washington administration party coalition led by Alexander Hamilton, Washington's Secretary of the Treasury. So yeah, the Federalist Party rose out of George Washington's policy and was a nationalistic conservative party that favored banks and businesses. They worked toward modernization and industrialization while promoting federalism, which was the power of the federal government over state government. But the Federalist Party wasn't long-lasting, and by the end of the War of 1812, the party had collapsed. And the reason, from what I've read, is that the perception of the people was that the Federalist Party favored the rich. And no, I ain't going to point out that history does repeat itself. Now, there was some opposition to the Federalist Party, and they were the anti-administration party created by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. And while this was an informal party, it did lead to the creation of the Democratic Republican Party. This new party believed in liberalism, which meant freedom of speech, press, and religion, among other things, as well as republicanism, which was basically everything else outlined in our Constitution. And the only real thing to take from this Democratic Republican Party is that they are the very first ancestor of today's Democratic Party. But like everything else in America in the early 1800s, everything was changing. And with Andrew Jackson's presidency, the Democratic Party fractured. And this is where things set the stage for where we are today. One half of the fracture was a Democratic Party, a party that stood for individual and states' rights, believed in the executive power of the presidency over other branches, while opposing high tariffs in the banking industry. The second fracture from the Democratic Party was the Whigs, and they believed in the power of Congress over the president and economic protectionism. Now, the Whigs were a party that was to go down to a massive defeat in 1852, and a lot of the Whigs joined up with either the Know-Nothing Party, a party of populist nature that believed in stuff like hating Catholics, and whose members were required to state that they didn't know anything when asked about anything, and specifically about politics. Now, that all kind of sounds like Republicans today, and now that I got my dig in, I'm going to move on. The birth of the modern Republican Party, founded in 1854, the party was anti-slavery, favored economic reform and investments in railroad and manufacturing. The Republican Party was made up of a lot of leftover Whigs, and they had their first meeting in an old schoolhouse in Wisconsin. Now, the difference between the Republican and Democrats back in the day, despite different stances on slavery, was that Democrats were basically agrarian-orientated, giving their support to farmers, and Democrats were a little bit more conservative back in the day. And the Republicans, they were more industrial-orientated. But the truth is, the voters of both parties had broad-based voting coalitions. By the time of the arrival of the 20th century, the Republican Party had a steadfast belief in fiscal conservatism, which was an ideology based in capitalism, individualism, limited government, and a laissez-faire, or a hands-off when it comes to staying out of other people's business, as well as business in the economic sense as well, which meant free markets, free trade, and a lot of tax cuts. The Democratic Party at the arrival of the 20th century was still rooted in agrarianism, which meant their support was rural. Democrats also believed in the expansion of presidential power and expansionism in general. But what Democrats opposed was a national bank and a lot of high tariffs. Essentially, the difference between the two parties was that the Republican Party was dominated by rich businessmen and the Democratic Party was dominated by those who were not. And it stayed that way until the Civil Rights Movement, when everything changed. Now, please pay attention, close attention. President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill in 1964, a bill a lot of Northern Democrats favored and a lot of Southern Democrats did not. And as expected, a lot of Black Americans switched their party affiliation to Democrats. Whereas the Democratic Party was seen as progressive, the Republican Party was seen as wanting to keep everything the way it was and had been. The thing to understand here is that the Democrats' power base was in the South, and these Southern Democrats had a strong representation in Congress, winning both houses back in 1912, and they even elected Woodrow Wilson. And a couple of decades later, it was the Southern Democrats that were against the signing of the Civil Rights Bill. So much so that a lot of Southern Democrats switched to the Republican Party, and that's pretty much where the parties remained till the rise of the Tea Party and MAGA. The bottom line here is that it's a tangled, convoluted history that our political parties have, and the question we all have today is, what will they be writing about the history of political parties in another 100 years? I don't know, but I will say this. Thanks for watching, my friends. Now go get active and maybe even think about voting. Oh, man. This was a video that could have drove me to drink and drink a lot. But it was a fun one to do. And I'm not sold on political parties, and I tend to agree with George Washington that political parties are the bane and the destruction of a democracy. And I don't know why we have them. I really don't. And why only two? I mean, they've got such a monopoly on everything. They control the money, the funding for political parties. Yeah. Okay. One of the things I like about a lot of the videos I do, I always manage to learn something. And digging into what happened after the Civil Rights Bill was signed was interesting to me. Like just how that all happened, that shift there. And it really boils down to that a lot of Southern Democrats were just totally against civil rights. Go figure, But here we are, 40, 50, 60, 65 years later, and yeah, I'm not sure that I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Probably because I did that shot tequila first, and if I had my bottle here, I'd probably do another one, but I don't, so I'm going to leave it at that. I hope you took something from this video. I don't know what, but I hope you took something. And I'll leave it at that. Peace out, my friends, and thank you for watching. It is very well appreciated. Out of here.